Every time I post an SAT video, it gets this massive view spike about 24 hours before the exam. Who is out here watching SAT videos the day before the exam? Me. I did that. And you know what? It made me feel better too. I just wish the advice I got was more useful than to get a good night's sleep. Oh really? Wow, you know, I didn't even think of that. Thank you, Rob, my almighty savior. I'm making this video for two types of people. Either your exam is in 3 months, or your exam is tomorrow. I'm gonna give you both advice so you can maximize your score by avoiding the mistakes that so many students make. It feels like literally every YouTube video starts by how you should start your studying by taking a practice exam. Figure out where you are, and then come up with a study plan. Now that advice was super valid on the old SAT. When it was a paper exam, you had like a million practice exams online to do. But nowadays, when you're taking the digital SAT, you only have a handful of good quality practice exams that you got from College Board. You do not want to burn through all of your practice exams right at the start. If your exam is several months away, you want to pace out when you're taking these exams and preferably save as many as you can for right before the exam to really get that last minute push in. Hands down, the practice exams that you get on Blue Book are the best resource, and so you want to ration them out accordingly so that you can use them as a way to test your skills as you continue to learn. Now we mentioned using one exam as a benchmark or a diagnostic to try to figure out where you are, but when you only have like 6 practice exams to work with, you don't want to be burning them unnecessarily if there is a workaround here. So if you want to figure out where you are without actually burning through one of these exams, there's a couple smart things you can do. First of all, most of your schools will probably require you to take the SAT or the ACT at some point. Now, if that exam date happens to be within the next couple of weeks, then just use that as your benchmark. You have to take it anyways, it's required, and if it fits within your timetable, then go ahead and do it. Same thing applies to the PSAT. A lot of people don't realize it, but the way that the PSAT scoring works is it's meant to be translational to the SAT. So if you got a 1400 on your PSAT, that is College Board's estimate of approximately where you would score on the SAT as well. If you just took the PSAT in October, then you can go ahead and use that score as your benchmark for your study. Think about your practice exams like this. If you don't know comma rules before going and taking an exam, realistically, you're going to get a good number of those comma rules questions wrong when you take the test. So if we're talking optimal strategy here to get the most reward for every exam that you take, you want to have at least done a introductory level of SAT studying before you go on to take that first practice exam. It does not take a ton of time to learn the basics of SAT grammar and SAT math fundamentals, just going ahead looking over those formulas. And that way, when you take that first exam, not only is it a benchmark for you to figure out where you are and create a study plan, but you can also use it as a way to practice those skills that you just learned. It's another opportunity for you to test yourself on something that you just studied, and that way you get the most bang for your buck. Ideally, you spend at least 2 to 3 weeks ramping up in whatever way works for you. So that means using like an online software, a textbook, Khan Academy, doesn't really matter. Your goal here is just to familiarize yourself with the content. If your exam is several months out, you can spend a little bit longer in this like ramping up phase just so that your baseline score when you start your first round of studying is higher. But if your exam is coming up much sooner than that, go ahead and push that timetable down, take your first exam. That way you can create a study plan and then go ahead and start working towards your goal score. So naturally, as you get deeper and deeper into studying, we want to keep having this same mentality around the practice material that you have. There's only a limited amount. You want to make the most of it, so don't just waste it randomly doing practice exams and burning through the small amount of good quality content you have. Study, prepare, work hard, and then think of the exam as a way to test yourself just like you would on the real exam to really see where you're at. Always take that practice exam exactly like you would a real exam. Don't take pauses, don't take breaks, just do exactly what the actual exam would be like so that you can really get yourself into that testing mode and get the highest score possible on these exams so that you can really see where you're at. And then of course, please, once you finish your exam, do not just close out of the tab and never open the test again. So many people make this mistake, it's ridiculous. You don't increase your score by simply taking practice tests. You increase your score by reviewing the mistakes that you made on these tests and then learning from them the next time. If you don't learn from your mistake, how is your score going to go up, bro? Matter of fact, join the YouTube video. Tell me, bro. Explain it. How is that going to work? The secret to standardized tests, which can be explained in 15 seconds and doesn't need 100 YouTube videos, is that every single SAT exam is intended to test the same topics with the same level of difficulty, just with slightly different questions. Think of your SAT score like a canoe. Every mistake that you make is like a little hole in the base of your boat that's filling it up with water and then dragging your overall score down. Your goal is to plug as many of these holes as possible through studying, figuring out what concepts you're struggling with, what concepts you're missing, what things you need more practice practice with. And then as you plug more and more holes, there's less and less water in the boat. The point here is that you're gonna get close to a 1600, and that's what you're aiming for. If you're only taking practice tests to stare at your score once you're done and get that little dopamine hit, right? You feel productive. You're just not going to see that meteoric rise in your score that maybe some of your friends have been talking about. That one homie you know from school, the one that went from a 1200 to a 1550, I'm telling you right now, they didn't get there by grinding YouTube shorts for SAT tips. Put down your phone and go study. I'm gonna be very honest, if you wanna score a 1500 plus on your SAT, it just comes down to practice. Now, one of the hardest parts about studying for the DSAT is that there are so few practice materials out there, which is what makes Acely such a powerful tool. Volume practice is the key to standardized testing success, and you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on a tutor to get that. Acely's website comes with 20 full-length practice exams and essentially an unlimited number of practice questions for you to go through. My favorite part is that you can also choose the difficulty of the questions that you want to do. So if you ever feel like your studying is getting too easy, you can just change the difficulty setting to hard and then only get the hard questions. They also have prep materials for the PSAT, ACT, and AP exams, so this is your one-stop shop to get your studying in. You can try Acely for free and get $10 off your first month by using the code PREACHINGP10. Just click the link in the description to get started, and thank you to Acely for sponsoring this video. Another super common mistake that at this point I'm just tired of seeing are mistakes with commas, colons, semicolons, and em dashes. These punctuation mistakes are so easy to fix, so I'm just gonna teach them to you right now so you never make another mistake again. Whenever I try to learn this and someone would start talking about independent and dependent clauses, I just zone out. It's not the most intuitive way to learn it. Instead, we're gonna break up punctuation into 3 distinct categories. Okay, we have our stop punctuation, our half stop, and go. What stop punctuation is the type of punctuation that can link only complete ideas. So let's define what a complete idea is. If we have a sentence that says, I want to get a 1600 on my SAT, that's a complete idea, right? It has all the different elements of a complete sentence. It makes sense on its own. That's the easiest way I like to remember it, is that if that portion of a sentence or that sentence just makes sense on its own, it doesn't need anything else, doesn't need any other words, then it's a complete sentence. An incomplete sentence would be like if it's missing an element. So if I just said, wanted to get a 1600, that doesn't work. You need something more there, right? You need to say, I wanted to get a 1600, or he wanted to get a 1600. If it's missing that subject in the sentence, then it's an incomplete idea. So bringing it back to this table, here we have stop punctuation, which includes a period, a semicolon, or a comma plus fanboys. We'll explain what fanboys is in a second, or an exclamation mark, which rarely shows up in the exams. You would use these types of punctuation to link 2 complete ideas together. So essentially 2 independent sentences can be linked with one of these, which if you think about it makes sense, right? You use a period to link 2 complete sentences. That's very, very logical. You use a semicolon the same way. When it comes to a half stop, it's a complete idea that must precede this type of punctuation. So if you have a complete idea and then you follow that up with a colon or a long dash, that is what we call a half stop, and we'll show you some examples in a second. The last category here is go punctuation. This is where people tend to make a lot of mistakes because it involves the use of commas or even nothing, right? And that distinguishing factor between whether or not you use commas where people get tripped up, I'm gonna go ahead and just break that down for you real quick. That way, even if your exam is tomorrow, hopefully I can save you an extra 10, 20 points if you just lock in for the next couple minutes. This acronym right here, okay, you see this? Fanboys, I want you to memorize that. You can literally pause the video right now, take 30 seconds to memorize it. It is not that hard. It's just an acronym for the 7 most common transition words that are used with a comma. So for example, we have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are the 7 most common ones. They make up this acronym fanboys. Pause the video, memorize that right now. If we just loop back to this table for a second, where we're talking about stop punctuation. The idea here, when you're doing stop punctuation, is that you can also use a comma plus one of the fanboys. So for example, and is a very common one. You have a complete idea, comma, and then you throw in another complete idea. That's a very, very common way to link sentences together, and it's another form of this stop punctuation. When it comes to stop punctuation, like we just talked about literally 15 seconds ago, here's a great example of how you can use a comma with fanboys. I wanted to go to the park, but it started raining, okay? Think about that. Let's dissect that sentence for a second. I wanted to go to the park. That's a complete sentence. It started raining. That's also a complete sentence. We can link both of these by using a comma and but. Simple as that. Not that hard. When it comes to go punctuation, we can use this to separate incomplete ideas from complete ideas. Look at the example sentence. After the movie ended, we went out for ice cream. So for example here, we went out for ice cream is a complete sentence, but after the movie ended, you can't just say that, after the movie ended. That's not a complete sentence. So what we're doing is we're using the comma here as go punctuation to connect the 2 together. Another really, really common one is in lists. And a great trick here is to just keep in mind that on the SAT, when you're using commas to separate out lists, always put in a comma before the last item in the list. That's just their standard punctuation. That's always how it's going to be. And then lastly, and this is kind of my favorite one because I feel like it's always a freebie on the exam, you use commas to separate out unnecessary information in a sentence. So for example, looking at this sentence here, the Eiffel Tower, which is located in Paris, attracts millions of tourists every year. You wanna know how to tell whether or not you should be using commas here? It's by removing this middle part of the sentence, the part that's surrounded by the two commas. If you were to delete this, let's just do it right now. Does the sentence still work? The Eiffel Tower attracts millions of tourists every year. That sentence works, which means that this part that we just deleted is unnecessary and can be separated out using commas. The two quick examples with this real quick. So here we have the sentence, changing your lifestyle to punctuation, include more exercise may help decrease the occurrence of headaches. Which of the answer options is correct? Well, first of all, think about it this way. Almost every single one of these questions is going to have this like no change option. As you're reading the sentence for the first time, immediately see if the punctuation there makes sense. What we have here is a semicolon. We classified semicolon as, we'll just go back 2 slides, semicolon falls under stop punctuation, can link only complete ideas. So if we go back to the sentence, changing your lifestyle to, is that a complete idea? No, of course not, right? And anyone with a couple brain cells would be able to identify that. So clearly a semicolon is not going to work here. No change can't be one of the answer options. Now, out of the 3 remaining answer options, which one is going to make sense? Well, to figure that out, we can read the second part of the sentence. Include more exercise may help decrease the occurrence of headaches. That is also not a complete sentence. So given that the first part and the second part are both not complete sentences, we can only be using go punctuation here, which includes commas or just no punctuation at all. If we look at the answer options, we have no punctuation, an em dash, or a colon, which both of these options, C or D, wouldn't be appropriate here because they're not types of go punctuation. Now let's just look at B and place it in the sentence, see if that works. Changing your lifestyle to include more exercise may help decrease the occurrence of headaches. Boom. That sentence reads great. You didn't need any punctuation there. Answer is clearly B. Here's one more example just to really drill the concept down. Clinical trials manager, pharmacy technician, healthcare administrator, many careers in the medical field exist beyond just nurse or doctor. A little bit more tricky here, right? We have a couple of commas. The sentence reads a little funny. Let's see what answer options work. First of all, like we just talked about, would no change be appropriate here? Well, reading over the sentence the first time, having a comma there it doesn't feel right. Right? It doesn't read normally. It feels like there's something a little bit off. Like you would want an extra pause or something there. So it's probably not going to be A. Let's just look over the other options though, because I'm not sure. Looking at the other answer options, let's just start by taking a look at C. First of all, you have a semicolon here, which is a form of stop punctuation. Why would the second sentence start with and? And many careers immediately gives off a red flag that the second part is not a complete idea, and so C is not gonna work. With D, well, we can just plug D into the sentence to see if that reads. If we remove the comma, it becomes healthcare, health administrator careers in the medical field exist beyond just nurse doctor. That doesn't read correctly, right? So it's not C, it's not D. So that leaves our options being between A with the no comma, which already reads kind of weird, or B, which adds in an em dash to separate out the ideas. If we read the sentence with the em dash, clinical trials manager, pharmacy technician, healthcare administrator, many careers in the medical field exist beyond just nurse or doctor, that fits beautifully, right? It separates out the ideas logically, it makes sense compared to this comma, which is just jarring in the sentence. It doesn't work logically. Grammar lesson with Preaching P done. Let's talk about the rest of the test. When it comes to reading problems, people overcomplicate this section so much. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Unlike the math or grammar questions, which are based on fixed rules, right? It's definitive. They're either right or wrong. Sometimes these reading questions can feel subjective and, maybe one answer looks good, but the other one also looks good. The trick here is to make your number one priority when you get these paragraphs focusing on comprehension. So many of the questions that you get are just testing your understanding of the reading, and they can literally be answered within seconds if you have a good comprehension of what you just read. A lot of people get really stressed out over the amount of time you have for the exam, right? You have 54 questions, 64 minutes, you get a little over a minute per question. But if we just take a step back for a second, think about some of the grammar questions we were just looking at. If you know your fanboys and your comma rules, quiz yourself right now. Do you remember fanboys, right? If you remember that, those questions will literally take you like 15 seconds tops to answer. You can just breeze through them. And so that way, when you reach these questions that are a little bit trickier, they have a little bit more content to read, you need to really think about them, you can afford to spend a little bit longer on them, whether that means a minute and a half or 2 minutes or whatever you need to make sure you get that question correct. So if you run into a longer question when you're taking an exam, especially when you're studying and it's just a practice exam, slow down, take a deep breath, and take as much time as you need to go ahead and answer that question. As you get more familiar with the exam's format and the types of questions to expect, you will naturally get faster. That just happens over time as part of your progression. It's not something that you need to specifically work on. You would much rather be the student that's getting a perfect or near perfect score on the reading section, but is just taking a couple minutes too long, as opposed to the student who's speedrunning their exam in half the time, but also getting half the exam wrong. There are no bonus points for finishing the exam early, so make the most of the time that they give you. And if you're reaching the stage where you're getting a lot of the questions correct, you're doing a great job, but you just need to speed it up, well then that's when we can start talking about how to optimize your test taking strategy to just speed up those last couple minutes. It's not a particularly challenging task. And while we're on the topic, let's just talk about exam pacing, because this is one of the most underrated parts of being able to score in that 1500, 1550 plus range. Every single one of you watching this has had that universal experience where you're sitting in high school, you're taking an exam. Imagine you're in math class and you have that one homie. Whether or not they're your homie or not is secondary. They go through, they speed run the exam, they finish it with like half an hour to spare, and they just slam their pencil down on the table to let everyone know, hey, I finished the exam early. I finished it first. Congratulations, bro. You just lost all your aura. Like, saying you finished your SAT exam early is one of the dumbest flexes I've ever heard, because you don't gain anything from it. Who are you racing against? Who are you trying to impress? I would have more respect for you if you just took your time to do a good job on the exam and then went and then lied to other people about finishing it early, because at least then you're not doing yourself dirty. Notice how the same people who speed run their SAT are not the ones who get the perfect scores, because that strategy just doesn't work. You'll never meet a perfect scorer who's half reads and skims every single question, because it's not an effective way to consistently and accurately get those questions correct. The more practice exams you take, the better you'll feel about the pacing of the exam. Now keep in mind that when you're taking the SAT, each section has two distinct modules, right? You have module 1, module 2. So in your mind, you kind of need to be thinking about your pacing relative to one another. Those module 1 questions are not particularly difficult, so you should be able to work your way through them at a reasonable pace. The way I like to do it is by the time you get to the end of like module 2, you want to have at least 5 to 10 minutes to spare to go back and review the questions in that module. The reason I like that 5 to 10 minute mark is it also forces you to take your time when you're doing the rest of the exam. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to be going back and reviewing your questions every single time, all the questions, to catch careless mistakes you make. You want to be able to look at the questions one time, get the right answer, and move on. That last 5 to 10 minutes that you're saving is just to go back and review any tricky questions, anything you were a little bit unsure of, or you left blank the first time around, or you just kind of guessed on. That way you have a little bit of buffer time, but at the end of the day, it's just a little bit of buffer time. The rest of the time of the exam is spent directly into pacing yourself well, taking your time, answering the questions correctly and accurately, and then moving on. Now, most people are able to consistently do this for the reading section, but for the math section, I get it, it's a little bit different, right? Because if you're very, very strong in math, there is a chance that you're just finishing the exam with 15, 20 minutes left, and even though you're going slow and you're taking your time, the questions are just not that hard. At the end of the day, it's the SAT. If you're already taking like calculus in high school, some of the questions are just going to feel very, very light. If you're in that situation, don't worry, I've been there too. I think the best thing that you can do is go through those module 2 questions and essentially just redo the exam, right? You have 20 minutes left over. The exam is not that long. So set your TikTok brain aside for 2 hours and use the entire allotted time they give you to make sure that your answers are correct and you put your best foot forward. You never know when you'll catch a mistake or two, and the difference between a 1490 and a 1520 could literally mean not having to retake the exam. Would you rather spend an extra 5 minutes of your life double checking the work, or 2 months of your life studying for the exam again? Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure to check out Acely in the description. I know my upload schedule has been a little spotty recently, but I'm going to be grinding out videos over the next couple months. So if there is a topic that you want a video on related to college admissions, SAT, study videos, send me an email to this email address. I'm more than happy to make a video on a topic, even if just one of you wants it. Hit me up on Instagram if you have any questions. This has been your boy Pratik. Peace.